Welcome to there we go. Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show. This is Gruber Power Services, and our first session, our first podcast for Gruber Power Services. See my shirt here? It says Gruber Power Services.
Gruber Power Hour.
Yeah, there we go. The Gruber, yeah, we always struggle with the names until we get used to it. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Claude Dixon.
Yes, and Claude is the Chief Operations Officer at the Gruber Companies, or Gruber Power Services. And today we're going to start this podcast by talking a bit about the industry, maybe some history, and there's not too much pressure here today because I think we have 7 subscribers at this point.
We're actually at 11.
Right.
Oh, we're at 11 now. See, they're already coming in.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. And it's these things all start small and they eventually grow into something much bigger.
That's right. This is our very first one, and we're kicking it off with U11.
Right. And behind us here, we usually talk about the picture behind us. This is a data center utility room, and this is typically where the type of equipment that we service nationwide resides. Uninterruptible power systems, lighting inverters, battery systems, generators, anything to keep the building alive during a power outage. So we also noticed this morning that we've got a patriotic color scheme going on here, including our red shirts, red, white, and blue. So what you'll find is that every podcast we will put up a different image behind us. Sometimes it's related to the content. And most recently, we've been using artificial intelligence to render the images. Claude is also an avid photographer, and we might even pop in some pictures from his vacations. Tell us about your last one.
That's right. Just in from Alaska. Went to Seward, Homer, Anchorage, up to Denali National Park. Epic. I'm an avid hiker, so got on some of the trails out there. Basically saw pretty much each element of wildlife excluding a bear.
Okay.
So I was somewhat disappointed in that, but there's going to be a return trip later, but it was epic. We were there, my wife and I were there about 5 days, and of course that's never enough time, but we did what we could, but it was absolutely stunning. My first time there. I've been to pretty much all the other states with the exception of Alaska. It was my first time, and we'll definitely be heading back.
Mm-hmm. What was the average temperature while you guys were there?
It was about 31 degrees at night. And It warmed up to about 55. There was some rain, but it was pretty moderate. But, we're into the good time of the year, June, July, August. You're pretty much, that's when people go, from outside the state to visit. And so I think we lucked out with the weather.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the pictures. Yeah.
I think that's the first time I've heard somebody upset they didn't run into a bear.
Yeah. And you know what? I wanted to run into this bear actually on a hiking trail, truly out in the wilderness. I mean, they educate you on how you, fend one off, what you do and what you don't do. So, I was, got to be composed.
Yeah. Huh. Did you have bear spray? Or, I mean, how do you make sure that he doesn't get too close?
Well, first of all, you make sure that any food that you're carrying is covered, because that's the first thing they're going to sense. And then, of course, you do have your bear spray, and you never run. You make yourself bigger, and you slowly back away.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good lesson. So you guys ever go to Alaska? That's how we do it. Yeah. I think we have mountain lions in this state, don't we? Or used to have
I've
them.
actually run across a few mountain lions on my trail hiking here in Arizona, because most of the trails I do are backcountry. I don't do the normal trails where there's a lot of people. I'm normally by myself, backcountry. So I'm talking, 10 to 15 miles each time. And I've, run into a couple. I've had a couple of encounters. But most of them, they just run away. Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, we had one off of Tatum and Shea a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't know.
Yeah, apparently one came off the Phoenix Preserve and found its way onto the intersection at Tatum and Shea.
Oh, wow.
He was, I think, looking for food.
Yeah. Make sure you keep your pets inside during that time. Wow.
Yeah.
So a little bit about us. I'm Pete Gruber, of course. Claude, when did you join us? What's your background? Maybe we can talk a little bit about ourselves before we get started.
Okay. I joined the company, actually 2 stints. I joined the company back in 2000, was with GPS when we were in one building for about a year. left the company, and then 10 years later, Pete reeled me back in again, 2009, and I've been here ever since, about 14 years. My background is varied. In the critical power industry, it's been about 14 years, but prior to that, it's been snack food, wine, manufacturing, finance. It's been a very varied research and development. It's been a very varied career, and it's served me well later on in my life.
Let's talk about the football playing experience too. You left that out.
Yeah, I did. Major college player, played for the Beavers. Any Beavers out there? I played for Oregon State all 4 years, recruited out of high school, and that was a wonderful experience. Obviously, I got my degree and, moved on from there. Didn't play anything professionally, but those life lessons and, teamwork lessons you learn by being an athlete have benefited me well here in my career here at Gruber.
And then Claude also pays back. You're a football coach as well.
Yes, coaching football ages 6 all the way up to high school. Done a few stints. I'm currently not coaching now. I've pretty much, when I relocated here from the East Valley to the North Side, it kind of cut my players away because they're not, the parents aren't going to take them, an hour to go practice. So, but I was in it for about 10 years, enjoyed it a lot. We won a lot of games, which is always good.
Right.
But the life lessons and being able to work with kids was what was most beneficial.
Certainly, yeah. Inspire them. And so the company that we're involved in here, Gruber Power Services, there's a bit of history there as well, and we should probably talk about that since this is the inaugural podcast. 40 years ago, 1983 actually, is when these companies got their start. And the original goal, it was just me at the time, working out of a house basically, and it was called Gruber Associates back then. When you're small, you kind of try to make it sound bigger, and Gruber Associates implied that there were other people. There weren't. It was just me at the time. I had just finished a stint working for Digital Equipment Corporation, which at the time was like IBM number 2. They built mainframes. You had a number of mainframe manufacturers: Data General, Wang, Burroughs, Tandem, Digital, IBM. And these were the companies that really were involved in the computer business. There were no PCs yet. There were no personal computers, small PCs. And so I spent 10 years there. I spent the last 3 years or so at Digital as the consultant that would guide their customers after buying huge mainframe equipment, how to prepare their building for this. You can't just simply take rooms full of large equipment like this, plug it into an existing building, and not prepare for it. The specific areas of preparation were you had to have a lot of cooling. This equipment threw out enormous amounts of heat, and your central, your people comfort air would not be able to handle that. So one of my jobs was to do calculations. How many BTUs is the equipment putting out? How much additional AC is this building going to need? What kind of layout did they have? Where could they fit this equipment and all that? The second portion was clean electricity. Computers don't like dirty power. And if you're in an industrial setting where you have welding taking place or heavy load switching of any type, that will affect the quality of power getting to your computers, and the computers will glitch. They'll go on and off. They'll, they will malfunction or even create some damage in them. So power conditioning was big in the 1980s when I got started, 1983. And before UPSs even, because UPSs were very expensive back then, and the majority of power conditioning was transformer-based, tap switchers, ferroresonant type power conditioners, and some UPSs involved as well. And then the third thing was fire suppression. That was before we realized we had a hole in the ozone layer, and they were using halon in data centers, large tanks, and you had to have plumbing and nozzles and everything to control a fire should it break out. And then the final element was cabling, data cabling. How do you connect all of the dumb terminals? And back then there were no smart PC workstations. They were literally CRT-based dumb terminals, yeah, and lots of printers, of course, and line printers, and you had to cable all of this stuff up and connect it to various parts of the building. So my job was to guide customers through this process of preparing their building for all of this big UPS equipment. And invariably, after I got done doing layout, design type work, basically architectural work, even the data cabling, you had to plot everything, they would say, now, where do I go to get this done? And the resounding answer typically was, you know what, we've got a few contractors in this state. I wasn't really confident in any of them. They were just not able to deliver 100%. And that was what I recognized as the business opportunity. There was a complete void there in terms of qualified contractors. They could do infinitely more than just build walls and do carpentry or put in floors and all that. Oh, by the way, I left that out. Back then, everything was access floor and 2x2 tiles, basically. And that's where you parked all of your data cabling, electrical runs, and your plumbing. Oftentimes, you had chilled water units that required large pipes that brought in cool water from the chiller outside. And all of that was buried underneath the access floor. So that was the original intent. I had saved up about a year's worth of salary from my stay at Digital and started to work out of my house, planning on building and designing computer rooms. Well, that was a noble, vision, but all I could do at the time was run data cabling. And so anyway, I would go out and get jobs, and I would, be hired to run all the cabling for the data centers, and eventually realized that every time I had these cycles, these big swings. 1 minute I had lots of work, and while I was doing the work, nobody was on the phones finding new work. So by the time I got done, I had nothing in the pipeline. And I quickly realized that you really have to do both functions at the same time. Somebody on the phones looking for business and somebody doing the work. So I got my first employee. And he was a field engineer that worked with me at Digital. And from there, it grew to more data cablers. And eventually, we added electrical work, since that was also part of running wires, throughout these the computer rooms, as they call them back then. Later on, they started calling them data centers. And then eventually we got into power conditioning. And also air conditioning. And back then, the way that you offered product was you became a manufacturer's rep. And that was difficult because working out of a house, we weren't really large enough to attract the A-grade products. So we started looking for the B-grade vendors and, to try to fit them into what we were doing. And eventually found a company, Best Power Technology, a UPS company, that had a different philosophy. They did not go through manufacturers' reps. They actually developed, heaven forbid, their own sales channel, their own salespeople, which manufacturers back then didn't do. They relied on manufacturers' reps. So everybody was watching this company to see how that would work out, and it worked out quite well, because what happened was they had a performance-based discounting system where you started at 15% discount for the product, for their UPSs, and you were able to get up to 30% depending on the volume you did. Well, that was brilliant, because now they had loyalty. You stayed with a brand because you wanted to sell as much of that as you could to get up to 30%. And you didn't have to, share anything with manufacturers' reps, at least the manufacturer. So that was our first major line. We then picked up Deltec, which is now out of business. And then we had Exide for a while. And then eventually later on, APC PowerWare's gone through a number of gyrations. In fact, Best was eventually absorbed by the company that became PowerWare. General Signal, I think it was. It was kind of confusing. And now Eaton owns the whole, lock, stock, and barrel.
Many of those out of business, Deltec, we still have pieces of those components here.
Yeah.
Various pieces.
Sure, yeah. That product is fairly bulletproof. There's, of course, newer technology that comes out all the time. And But the product itself, although the electronics change, they can continue to be repaired. It's kind of like
Right.
cars. You can drive cars from the last century as long as you maintain them and continue to repair them. So that's kind of a glimpse as to how the power services business got started. And there was one other element that I left out, which was service agreements. Typically, service agreements is something that a manufacturer offered, like Liebert, for example. And the notion of independent service really wasn't prevalent in the 1980s in the last century. And what we found was the way we got into it was we sold a power conditioner. It was a controlled power company out of Troy, Michigan, 45 kVA tap switching power supply. It was a small computer room in downtown Phoenix, Kaibab Industries, actually, a federal agency, does something with the Forest Service. And they called us one afternoon at 4 o'clock and they said, you know what, our computer room shut down. We can't work. We can't do anything. We need your help. Well, CPC, Control Power Company, was in Troy, Michigan. At 4 o'clock, they were already having supper at home, so we couldn't get a hold of them. And we said, you know what, we got to do something for this customer. So we looked over at one of the electricians who had come back from working for the day and said, hey, can you go out there and take a look at this thing? We just wanted to send a warm body to, to pacify the customer.
Right.
Well, he goes out there and he fixes it. And he ended up changing a fuse in this power conditioner. So we were pretty proud of ourselves. And within a couple of days, we had a call from this customer and they said, you know what, we realized how important this piece of equipment was. Do you guys offer service contracts? And of course, in sales, you never say no. You always say yes, and then you find a way to get it done, which is exactly what we did. So that was our first service agreement, and then we did some reverse engineering on the power conditioners. We learned how they operate. We trained one of the electricians to repair these things. Then I remember the second customer. Should I talk about that one as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, that first customer, you went from that to a nationwide service provider.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, today we're nationwide.
Yeah.
So the second customer was the Revlon Automated Warehouse on Buckeye Road. This was a state-of-the-art facility that I was familiar with even while I was working for Digital because they had a warehouse in the country, and it was an Eaton product, actually. But they had digital equipment, 1170 mainframe computers that were controlling this. In a nutshell, what this was a 100-foot tall warehouse. There were racks, multiple rows of racks, and 100 feet tall, that was broken out into quadrants or sectors. So every section on those racks had a particular name and number, and the computer tracked this. Then with a railroad track down below, they had what they called robots at the time that would automatically run out to that sector, go up a certain amount, retrieve that pallet, bring it back down, take it out of that lane, and then park it on a robot that basically ran on the ground.
Yes, they call that an automatic storage and retrieval system.
Exactly.
And one of my stints with PepsiCo, I ran an automatic storage and retrieval system warehouse through 11 robots that would carry the product to the dock to be loaded.
How cool was that back then? And it seems like low tech to us today, but I'm telling you, back then, this was high tech. I mean, magazines would come from all over the world to get pictures of this automated warehouse because you no longer had people doing lifting and carrying and forklifts running around. It was completely automated. And what was even cooler is once this rail mechanism deposited that pallet on a rolling robot, it would then roll it out to the production line, to the shampoo line, and deliver a whole bunch of bottle caps, to the production workers there.
And that piece was probably automated too.
Probably, yes. Yeah. So, and I still remember my wife always was concerned when I came home after going to the Revlon warehouse because you got permeated with perfume odor, right? And so all of the field engineers had an explanation. Well, I was at the Revlon warehouse.
Well,
You know.
would you rather have perfume and come home or snack food? Smell all over.
Oh, that's right. You were with
That's
what?
right,
Yeah,
Frito-Lay.
yeah, Frito-Lay. Yeah, yeah. Of course, if you work at a feedlot, then you wouldn't want to come home. But yeah. So anyway, that was our second customer, and what happened was they had an X-side UPS. It was only 75 kVA, but back then it was old tech, and they were huge. This thing was like 7 feet tall, about 8 feet wide or so, and they had lead acid wet cells, not just AGM batteries, sealed, no maintenance batteries, but they had these 120-pound jars that were full of sulfuric acid on these racks, multiple ones, and a special room because as these things were charging, they gave off hydrogen gas, which
Right.
is explosive. Anyway, they asked me whether we were able to take this thing on service because whenever they needed even a preventive maintenance done, it would cost them like $4,000 or $5,000 because Exide would fly in somebody from Raleigh, North Carolina, which was the headquarters for Exide. And I didn't know at the time how much they were charging them for this preventive maintenance. And they said, well, can you quote it? So I quoted it for $500. And of course, I got the job, realizing later that 4,000 was the magic number I needed to
Right.
beat, right? So that was another lesson, whole nother lesson, right? And but anyway, that was customer number 2, and from there we grew rapidly. The word got out, and we were mostly regional for the first decade or so, I would say, and eventually began to branch out into other parts of the United States. And the way we did that initially was through subcontractors.
That's correct.
And you have to pick your subcontractors carefully. They have to exceed your expectations, and they have to oftentimes be better than you.
Right.
So you should tell us about that then.
Yeah, even today, we still use a certain percentage of subcontractors. We do self-populate in certain parts of the country, but we have found, to Pete's point, being picky with subcontractors is the best way to go. So we don't deal with a lot of them, but the ones we do deal with are high quality.
Mm-hmm. And these are partnerships that have evolved over decades.
Yes, that's another thing that we've changed, where before it was kind of like, hey, you know what, we need you to go out and do a job for us. But now it's more partnership related, where, we're both into seeing both companies succeed.
Mm-hmm. So, and then at some point in time, when on a spreadsheet it makes sense to put an employee there, then we start to put our own people into various territories. But that subcontractor relationship with long-standing partners have been one of the reasons for our success.
Yes. And on the other side of that too is not just the electronic side. Where we've delved into is the electrical side, where we've picked up some really key, partnerships that have helped us succeed nationwide.
Mm-hmm. That's true. We also do electrical work around the country, and which goes hand in hand oftentimes with installing a UPS,
Correct.
an uninterruptible power system. So that's fundamentally the big picture for Gruber Power Services. And we have salespeople in various parts of the country as well. Account managers, it's always nice when you can send somebody out to a site and build a relationship with the customer. Now, the traditional way of having service done to various brands of UPSs was, of course, the manufacturers. And so here we're coming along now as an independent. And there are some advantages to working with independents. And the fundamental reason is we work on all brands. We have to. We're not monolithic. We're not just one brand. The traditional UPS OEMs can't work on all brands. And very few data centers are not mixed vendor environments. You have one UPS for your smaller single-phase stuff, one brand. Then you have another brand for the mid-size, and you may have another brand for the very large UPSs. So most data centers that we're in actually have multiple brands, and that's where independent maintenance like us really flourishes and shines because our people are trained on a wide variety of brands. And we can walk in, now take the entire service contract base under one contract, rather than the owner of the equipment having to deal with 3, 4, sometimes even 10 different companies. When you do preventive maintenance, for example, you send people out to do PMs on machines. When we go out, we can do all of them at one time, compared to the downtime that results from having 6 vendors coming in, each doing their own PM on their equipment.
Right. And then the scheduling nightmare that goes with that, especially when those 6 vendors are being funneled through one contact on the customer's end. So, instead it's kind of like a smorgasbord for us. We're able to service all brands.
So somewhere along the line as well, and it's probably a couple decades ago, we looked at the type of activity that we're involved in doing service on this critical power equipment, and we realized that batteries was a large part of that. So we ended up finding a vendor overseas that was able to make private label batteries for us. We call it the GPS Elite line of batteries. And we challenged them. We said, we want you to take a look at the various brands of batteries out there, and we want you to exceed the specifications in a number of key categories. They have to be flame retardant, for example. That was an important one. We got a really cool color, too. We've got that burnt orange with a green top. Back then, all batteries were black. They were black, and that was all you ever got. One company, actually, PowerSonic, I think broke the mold. They went with a light gray and a blue top, remember?
Right.
And that's probably what inspired us, come to think of it. So we developed our own line of batteries. And that has served us very well because now we have control of the entire process. And again, if you're using different brands of batteries, you have supply chain problems. You have pricing issues because you're not doing the volume that they feel that they would like to get from you. And you can't always be competitive. So this gave us a product that we were able to give the customer some savings and give them a consistent product. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we have another large battery similar to the Elite line that you're talking about that's currently under test right now.
Okay.
Out in the field, that's going to be even better than the one that we have. Of course, we're going to let the test results prove that, but right now we're currently testing it in the field.
What sort of categories were you guys improving?
The case, the amount of lead that's in the battery, just the weight of the battery, and the amp hour of the battery. Just a more powerful, unit that will last longer.
So the given amount of amp hours in a given size is what I'm
Yes.
assuming you're
Correct.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So today it's service. It's also the sale of equipment. We should probably talk about that too. Once you have a service customer, they realize that you have expertise. They tend to rely on you for technical information, advice. We want to upsize, we want to downsize. We have a new division here that's starting. Can you talk maybe a bit about the kind of opportunities that gives us and how it benefits the customer having a knowledgeable company that is already familiar with the site and their operations?
Sure, especially transitioning out of older equipment, upsizing, that type of thing. The UPSs that are being produced now are modular, where you're able to buy a unit. You don't have to buy everything associated with it in terms of power modules. You can buy what you need, and then over the course of time as you grow, upgrade and add power modules without having to reinstall a completely different unit. We have found that to be extremely advantageous. In fact, the market itself over the past few years has trended to this type of technology, and it has been serving our customers well. In fact, most of the opportunities we get now are modular units with the customer's intention on growing over the course of time.
I'm glad you brought that point up because there was a transition that occurred toward the end of the last century. Prior to that time, power conditioning and UPSs were sold by size. And if you had a 50 kVA requirement, typically people would give themselves a bit of buffer. And that was one of the things that I did advising customers. The first question I would ask is, what are your growth projections? And then we try to size the equipment based on meeting that growth projection. And of course, as they grew, eventually the equipment became too small and they would have to change out the entire box. So that 50 kVA no longer served them. They went to 200 kVA or whatever.
Along with the electrical.
Correct. What ended up happening toward the end of the last century, and it was really APC that pioneered this, scalable product
Yes.
so that you could essentially get a 500 kVA UPS loaded up with 200 kVA worth of modules, but then as your operations grew, you were able to simply plug and play and almost, in fact, hot swappable at the time too,
Right.
batteries and power modules, and you could expand and grow your capability. And as you mentioned, if the electrical grid or system in that building was properly sized for the maximum
That's
size
correct.
of that
You
UPS,
do it one time.
exactly.
Hmm.
And now you could grow and you didn't have to swap out that equipment. So that was a huge change in the industry. And you know what typically happens with a great idea? Everybody follows suit. And along comes PowerWare and Mitsubishi and Exai, all of the other UPS manufacturers quickly went to the scalable solutions. So one of the things that amazes me is in one of our other divisions, Gruber Motor Company, we work on Teslas, we work on EVs, and in that world, well, let me back up a moment. The reason we're in that world is because of our training in critical power. What is inside an electric vehicle is identical to what's in a UPS. You have a battery system, DC storage, and you have a three-phase inverter that converts all of that DC to three-phase AC. And the only difference between an EV and a data center UPS is what it powers. One powers a bunch of computers and servers in a data center, and the other one powers a drivetrain that propels four wheels or tires, on the road, which is really what got us into Gruber Motor Company. We took all the expertise that we had evolved for decades in Gruber Power Services and translated that into GMC. Now, the reason I'm going in that direction is the EV world has already adopted lithium ion and lithium iron batteries, whereas in the critical power world, they're still stuck on AGM batteries, lead acid batteries. We even have rooms that have wet cells still.
Yeah, we do, and we do have a few customers that have transitioned over to lithium ion, but right, it's mostly VRLA still.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I did want to point out that when businesses grow, it's usually because there's a symbiotic relationship between the new division that you've started. We're not making shoes currently based on what we're doing in power services. It's very similar to what we've already been doing. One other advantage that we had going into the EV space was that the manufacturers typically don't share intellectual property with competitors. We've been battling that for decades in the critical power world. PowerWare, APC aren't going to open up their schematics and show us what's inside those power modules so we can repair them.
Right.
So what we ended up having to do is do reverse engineering, combining that with service, and we're now able to create our own schematics, test points, wiring diagrams, and essentially recreating what the manufacturer did originally when they built and developed the product. We applied those same skills that we evolved and developed in the critical power world, which allows us to repair that type of equipment, in the EV space. When we first started working on Teslas, Tesla wasn't giving us schematics, intellectual property, all of their documentation on how their stuff works, what kind of components are on the boards, any of that. And we simply applied that those same principles that we learned in the critical power space to develop and reverse engineer EVs. Today, Tesla actually works with us, and we share information back and forth because they realize we have value. We haven't gotten the critical power vendors to that level where they realize that there's a benefit to working with an independent like us.
Right. We have not.
Do you think that will ever happen?
Actually, we're working on something right now with Eaton.
Mm-hmm.
They came in last week, and we said, hey, you know what? When are we going to overcome, what has been going on, and just in terms of how we've been operating? And they're setting up a meeting with their people for myself to come in there and discuss how we can improve our relationship with them.
One of the first things that come to mind for me, and I've been, thinking about this for a decade or two, is the obvious mixed vendor environment angle. Now, here's a perfect type of relationship for a company like us that does independent service and an OEM. We go into a site together. They've got a bunch of Eaton equipment, but why would Eaton be interested in only their equipment when the customer would end up with a better level of service if we partnered and they
Right.
brought in an independent like us to take care of all the other equipment? Eaton gets their portion, they still get what they want. It improves their chances of getting the service agreement in the first place. And they're partnered with two major players in the U.S., the OEM
right.
and an independent like
Well, the
us.
other piece too is that we sell their equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, we are partners. You know, right now we're not viewed that way, but it's certainly something that we should work towards. And yeah,
Yeah, we are partnered on the sales side, and you know all of the OEMs appreciate us for the sales portion of it, APC, you know, all of them. It's on the service side that we have this separation,
correct.
and so you guys are already working on it.
Yes.
All right.
And you know what we have found too is they're not necessarily connected in their own
They
organization,
are
sales
not.
and service.
No. Yeah. And that was the fundamental problem.
Right.
The same people that we made friends with at Eaton were not the same people that we were trying to be friendly with on the service side of things.
Right.
And by the way, as these podcasts and this visibility grows, eventually people from Eaton and other OEMs will be chiming in and viewing this. And these kinds of ideas that we're bouncing around now will eventually gain some traction. So anyway, that's the, I guess in a nutshell, what we do in critical power. Now, we had a few topics here that we wanted to talk about. Some of the capabilities that we have. First of all, being nationwide, if you have critical power equipment, no matter where it is in the United States, we are able to service it. If you're out of the country, we have at times even been contracted to fly somewhere to repair equipment.
That's
Guam
correct.
comes to mind, actually.
That's correct. Yeah, we have a couple of contracts that are actually outside of the United States where we use our domestic personnel to service those customers.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a two-pronged effort. The preventive maintenance or scheduled maintenance is done by our people flying somewhere, and then the quick remedial maintenance, the emergency services we call it, is performed by partners that we have in that territory.
That's correct.
So we had a few topics here that we wanted to cover with you. Power studies, power quality analysis. Can you tell us a bit about how we're able to help customers identify power problems in their building or in their facility?
Sure. We are capable. We have the equipment necessary to go in if you feel like you're experiencing dirty power to run a test, however long that might be. And then we're able to, evaluate that data and give you a course of action on how you can correct it. So we're set up for that. We're set up for that nationwide, not just here in Arizona. So if that need arises, we're available.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I worked for Digital, part of my job there was doing power quality analysis, and especially with customers on contract, because the majority of times, if a piece of equipment went down, there was something wrong in the equipment, and our field engineers took care of it. But then we had these annoying instances where there were intermittent problems, and I'll give you a couple good examples. One of them was a law firm downtown here, and at certain times throughout the day, their computer would just go down. And it was one of those computers that fed a bunch of dumb terminals, so it was important, right? And in the world, in the legal profession, you've got paralegals that are typing up dockets, and when that thing crashes and they haven't saved, they've lost an enormous amount of work. So there was a lot of consternation and anger that went along with this. So eventually, they would bring me out on site to do an analysis of what's going on outside, kind of like an environmental analysis. And I was no longer looking in the equipment because our guys had done that. There was something externally contributing to this downtime. So I ended up putting a Dranitz power line analyzer on this and began to realize at certain times of the day, the voltage would spike and dip. You got transients, you got dips. So the next thing I did after getting that data was I started to look around, where's the power coming from? And at some point, I determined that there was an outlet on the wall. There was another outlet on the other side of the wall for a different lease company that was leasing space there. And they had a copier plugged in. And whenever this copier fired, it dropped the voltage enough to where it was affecting this computer. It was not a dedicated circuit, in other words. And the fix, of course, was getting a dedicated line run all the way back to the breaker panel so they no longer were daisy-chained with other equipment. And that solved the problem. So anyway, we're able to do power analysis. Oh, I had a second story. All right, the Valley National Bank Tower in downtown Phoenix. They had a computer up at the in the radio room at the top of the building, and it was an American Express computer actually. And again, it went down at various parts of the day. So put the Dranitz power line, the power line analyzer on it. Didn't see any voltage anomalies. But we had a wide range of tools that we brought. One of them was a temperature humidity barometer or a recording device. So I brought that out. We also had an EMI meter, which would measure radio frequency. And the reason I was interested in that was at the top of the building, you know, they usually use those for antennas to broadcast back in the days when you had two-way radios. And there were some transmitters up there as well. And sure enough, what was causing the problems up there was a transmitter that was putting out sufficient power that was then decoding in the circuit boards in the computer, you know, sending signals that it wasn't expecting. So the point here being is the type of work that we do isn't just servicing UPSs. We can also do a power analysis, and if you have intermittent or strange problems in your facility, we're able to come in and do some analysis for you and help define what's going on.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to that too, it's thermographic analysis through our thermal cameras. That's another thing that we can do internal to the UPS. We have been doing this, and it has really resolved issues versus doing repeat trips trying to troubleshoot a UPS. We're able to dissect this, see where the heat is being caused, and replace that part and eliminate multiple trips. So that's another service and capability that we have.
Sure. And what we're using is FLIR technology,
That's
infrared
correct.
cameras. And when you have heat, that means you have a poor connection because you have resistance, and the byproduct is heat. A typical application for this is you take the circuit breaker panel off, and you take a picture of all of those breakers and all of those connecting points. And when you found a bad one, it will glow. It will be
Right.
red.
Also, the internal components inside the UPS, you know, the IGBTs, SERs, all that.
So typically UPSs in buildings are tied to a generator outside for extended runtime. And the reason that occurs is the UPS battery system typically is good for how many minutes would you say?
Well, if it has a generator, all
Well,
they need.
just the batteries,
3
10 or
hours.
15, 10 or 15 minute runtime just on the UPS batteries.
Right.
And then for extended runtime, they typically have an automatic transfer switch, which then switches you to a generator that begins to charge the UPS again so it can charge the batteries.
Now,
that have
that's in
been
an
used.
ideal situation. What we see most of the time is that there is no generator. So the customer has invested in the battery system. So we see run times as long as 4 hours.
Wow, that gets
Yeah.
expensive. Yeah. Okay. At some point in time, we used to take a look at, how many batteries do you have and what would it cost to do the transfer switch with generator. And then your fuel source being either diesel or gasoline or
Right.
whatever, is related to how much you can refill that. Certain times during natural disasters when your supply chain was disrupted and you couldn't get diesel, eventually the customers went down. But anyway, we are also available to do the design of a expanded protection system like that. So if you have a UPS, you want to go to a generator, we can help design that. Air handling and cooling optimization. What sorts of things are we doing there?
That is an area that we really haven't touched. Now, we touch it through utilizing the OEM, selling their product, but as far as our capability, we really haven't touched that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if the initial upfront calculations were done correctly, then the air handling system would have been correctly sized for that
That's correct.
space in that facility. Okay. It's only when it comes to expansion that they would need that reevaluated.
Correct.
And what you're saying is most likely customers have their own mechanical contractors at that point that
That's
can do
correct.
some of that. Okay. All right. What about a customer that comes to us and says, you know what, I realize my runtime isn't long enough. I've got 7 minutes. I'd like to extend that. What can we do then?
We can give them another battery cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's one way to do it. First of all, we want to go in and see whether or not the runtime calculation is correct. That's the first thing we do. And then if it is, and they want more runtime, then we just add batteries and cabinets at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. You know, usually with these podcasts, and I'm kind of used to having a question stream coming in from the audience. Do we have no questions at this point, guys?
We don't have anything coming in yet.
Okay.
We do have a few people out there watching, so if anybody listening has questions, feel free to put those in the chat for us. We do still have those couple pictures that you wanted to bring up, though, if you want to do that too.
Sure. I was going to use the pictures if we needed to give a perspective, like, let's bring up the battery picture. And this is one way of providing DC storage. What
Talking about the battery room with all the blue batteries?
Yes, yeah, with the blue batteries. And what you'll see here is a bunch of AGM, absorbent glass mat batteries. They're the sealed maintenance-free batteries on steel racks that are connected in series parallel for a particular string voltage. These are most likely all 12-volt batteries, and string voltages for UPSs are typically multiples of 12 volts, starting at like 120 volts DC, 240 volts, and 480 volts DC. And to achieve those voltages, what they do is connect these batteries in a combination of series and parallel. A series connected string, you add voltage, so it would take 10 12-volt batteries to give you 120 volts DC. And then series connections are for multiplying that's a series is voltage. Parallel is amperage or amp hour. So for a 240-volt string, what you would have is two sets of 10 batteries connected in series for 120 each, and then that 120-volt, those two strings are connected in series for 240 volts. And what Claude was saying earlier was that we are working on a new battery line, apparently, that gives us an additional amp hour capacity in a given space. As you can see here, you have finite space. So if these are all, let's say 80 amp hour batteries, if you get a battery that has a higher amp hour rating in the same case, you're actually going to end up with more power available. So this is one way to do DC storage. Another is to use wet cells, and those are typically in special rooms that are vented. And the final way to do this is to put them in battery modules, and then you get into the scalable UPSs or the hot swappable UPSs. And I don't have a picture here of a Symetra
Yeah, we need one of those.
SciBat. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a moment. About 2 or 3 decades ago, I'm bad with timelines, but it was a long time ago. The manufacturers, when they first came out with scalable UPSs, would give you a battery pack that you could plug in and out on a rack, and you could do that live, so you could actually add runtime. If you had 7 minutes runtime, you wanted a bit more, you would buy some of these battery packs, slide them in, and each time you did, you gained some more runtime, taking up to 15 minutes or whatever. These battery packs only last a couple, 3 years or so, and what we found is that when people got bad battery packs and they bought new ones, these things went to landfills. Some of them recycled and some went to landfills. We reverse engineered some of these battery packs and found that they are rebuildable. The first battery pack that we did was the SciBat battery pack, SYBATT, which is an APC product for the APC single-phase Symetra.
Yeah, the power array.
And we found that all it is 2 plastic clamshells that come apart quite nicely. And what you have is 10, 12-volt, 7 amp hour batteries connected in series inside that case.
Right, and today we still build those.
We do, yes. It's a very large part of our business. And there are a number of benefits. A, it's less expensive than buying a brand new battery pack. And what you're getting is brand new batteries. And because of the volume we do, we don't build them and put them up on a shelf and let them age like vegetables.
Right.
We actually build them to order, so you always get fresh batteries. And the final part of it, well, two things. It's less expensive for the customer compared to new, and we are now responsibly recycling. So these 12 7-amp batteries that get removed from these packs have a second life. We send them out. What they do is they take the sulfuric acid out, they neutralize it with baking soda, it becomes salt water, and you can flush it down the drain.
Right.
They recycle the plastic, and they recycle the lead. There's no such thing as virgin lead anymore. Everything is recycled. So we've got almost a 0 or 100% 0% waste stream.
Right. And we do that with all of our module line items, battery module line items. There's like 7 of them. The side bat is just 1.
And we have a whole team of people over in the depot area that are consistently recycling battery packs like this. Okay, so, and then we had a picture of the family of UPSs. I guess we can throw that up. We can talk about one of the vendors.
Just so you know, we're at 52 minutes.
Okay, we're going to run about an hour for this first session. And the picture that's going to come up here next is, this is one vendor. And you can see that oftentimes they have a wide range of products. Those very small UPSs that are right by me, and I'm going to point to it. Let's see, you got to, there we go. I have to do it backwards compared to the screen that I'm looking at. Those are typically throwaway UPSs. And what I mean by throwaway is they need to be recycled, of course. But, you know, you can buy one of these for a couple, $300, and it's not worth it to have a field engineer from our organization come out to change that one battery inside the small UPS. Now, you can send those to us, and we will both recycle them or rebuild them for you, put new batteries in there for you. And oftentimes, customers change their own batteries, which, by the way, brings me to another topic. Part of the evolution of this podcast and this online capability that we're now generating for GPS will be tutorial videos that show people how you can go inside this UPS and change this battery yourself. And we'll have a lot of tutorials out there. It will not only be how to change a battery, but what do I do after a power outage? My UPS has gone into bypass mode. And how do we handle that now, by the way?
Could you repeat that again?
Oh, when a power outage occurs at a customer site and the UPS goes into bypass mode, or it's actually doing its thing, what does a customer do next?
Well, it depends. If it's a contracted customer, they're going to call us because they have our 1-800 number and get a technician on the phone, and then the technician is going to walk them through how to get the UPS back out of bypass, assess the problem over the phone.
Which brings us into another topic, free tech support.
Yes.
You're not out there high and dry by yourself. When your power goes out and you're not sure what the blinking lights on the front of that UPS mean or what they're doing, feel free to call us. We have technical staff that's available
24/7.
I was going to say that 24/7. That is correct. Yeah. So what we're showing here is just the wide range of products that some of these manufacturers have. When you get into the mid-size product, then you start getting into the territory where where a service agreement makes sense. And, you know, a service agreement is insurance. One party is betting that you'll never have a failure. The other party is betting that you're going to have a failure. And you can figure out which one of us that is, right? So it gives you insurance. Some of the parts in these UPSs are incredibly expensive. If you lose an inverter, for example. And
there's also a cutoff too, since you have the whole portfolio there between the plug-and-play UPS and a UPS that would be hardwired.
Okay.
Yeah.
True, yeah. The things with a 120-volt cord on them would be considered plug-and-play, and then the rest are hardwired in by an electrician. So that kind of gives you an idea of the wide range of products that we service, that we're able to maintain, and the larger ones that we provide service contracts for. And remember, we are a sales and service organization. The nice part about an organization like ours being in a sales business is one shoe does not fit all. if you're an OEM and you have one product line, they're somehow going to try to make that product fit into all of your applications. Since we represent a number of manufacturers, we're able to get the right solution for that customer that
Yeah.
makes the most sense.
Yeah, just real quick, I wanted to go back on the tech calls for a second. The point that we made about being a mixed vendor environment, this is another scenario where, you might have an oddball UPS where you could utilize our 24-hour technical assistance because we service all brands.
Totally. Okay. So it looks like we're running up to an hour at this point.
Yeah, we're at 57 minutes.
All right. We normally ask the audience, do you have any final questions? But there's no one out there right now. And, I personally think it's going to be fun watching this grow because we've done it once before with Gruber Motor Company. And we always enjoy having people join us. When you do ask questions, by the way, we like to hear where you're from, what part of the world you're from even. We find that with GMC, we have people from all over the globe that are chiming in. Some of them it's the middle of the night for them. New Zealand, for example. People from Africa, yeah. Europe, definitely. Eastern Europe.
It'll help too when we get on the other platforms. So we'll start redigesting these podcasts and getting those other platforms built up.
Yeah, we should probably talk about that. Right now, this is streaming on only YouTube. Eventually, as we build up the subscriber base on these other platforms, we will be streaming on at least a half a dozen, if not more. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. And it all has to do with how many subscribers we have as to how quickly we can accommodate that. So we ask you to subscribe and, become part of this effort. And again, I think it's going to be fun to watch this grow. We'll have guest spots from time to time. We might bring in a field engineer, and we'll collect stories throughout the week to find some of the challenging repairs. Some of the ones that immediately come to mind is we've had UPSs on mountaintops here in Arizona, Maricopa County, for example, and our field engineers really enjoyed that helicopter ride up to that remote location where there were no roads.
Right. Another good one too is just how to prepare for storms
Yes.
this time of year.
We'll probably feature that in the next podcast then, because for years our company has sent out an email right around monsoon season here in Arizona. There are some precautions that you can take. And, maybe you have monsoon in other parts of the globe as well, which will be useful, but we'll talk about that as well. And in the meantime, if any of you have questions, things that you'd like us to feature, that you'd like us to talk about, what email would you like them to send that to, Claude?
We can send it to dix@gruber.com.
So dix@gruber.com for any of you that have questions or topics that you would like us to cover in this next podcast. Well, I want to thank everyone that showed up, or anyone that showed up. We had 11 when we started. How many did we have when we're...
I'm not sure about the subscribers, but there have been about 8 to 10 people watching throughout. So we'll see here at the end what the analytics look like. But yeah, we definitely do appreciate everybody. And if you can subscribe, it does help.
Okay. We'll be broadcasting this every Friday at 10 a.m. This time of year, it's Pacific Standard Time. And when the rest of the world goes back on daylight savings, then it's going to be Mountain Standard Time. So 10 a.m., we'll see you next Friday.
We will see you next Friday.
And thank you for joining us.